A wooden bucket stops halfway to a sheep pen because a bear is standing beyond the fence. The bear is back. If you were a medieval villager, the obvious answer would be simple. Shout, release the dogs, grab whatever weapons you have, and drive it away. A 14th century hunting writer named Gaston Phoebus says an unhurt bear will usually try to flee people. So imagine that working. The bear turns, it runs, the gate closes, the animals are safe. Problem solved. Except that is exactly where the real problem begins. Because if the same bear comes back tomorrow, you did not solve anything. You only ended one encounter. And the moment the animal starts returning, the question changes from how do we scare it away to something much more useful. Where will it pass next? By rogue bear, I do not mean that we possess one perfect medieval village chronicle recording a named bear attacking the same farm night after night. We do not. What survives is more interesting. Medieval descriptions of bears taking domestic animals, detailed instructions for trapping them, records showing how exhausting a single bear hunt could become, and enough evidence to reconstruct the logic without pretending one invented story is a documented event. And that logic begins with a surprise. Medieval bear hunting was not always about finding the bravest man. It was often about finding the bear. Phoebus says large bears could take pigs, sheep, and goats when the opportunity appeared. For a rural household, that matters immediately. A sheep is not background decoration. A goat is not a prop. They are food, breeding stock, labor value, stored wealth. A bear near the livestock pen is not interesting wildlife. It is a problem standing on four legs. But Phoebus also says something that breaks the modern movie version of the scene. Before a bear is wounded or cornered, it generally wants to get away. The danger changes when people keep pressing it. That means the heroic-looking solution can create a worse situation. Chase an unhurt bear and it may flee. Hurt it, trap it badly, or force it into a defense, and now the same animal can become far more dangerous. Phoebus even warns against one man trying to face a bear alone. He praises coordinated hunters instead. So the first discovery is almost backwards. The problem is not that medieval people had no way to make a bear run. The problem is that making it run may only move the problem into the forest. And once it is in the forest, you have to keep finding it. One documented hunt from 14th century Castile shows how extreme that could become. Near Navaluenga, royal hunters pursued a bear through snowy mountain country. Modern historical work on the account describes as many as 25 hounds involved in the effort. The pursuit stretched across more than 2 leagues. Men and dogs stayed with it through days and parts of the night. The bear was not taken that afternoon. It was not taken the next day. The hunt lasted 5 days. That sounds dramatic until you think about what it really means. 25 dogs were trying to keep track of one bear. Men stayed in the mountains. Others searched for shelter. The trail had to be picked up again and again. Individual dogs mattered enough to be named in the record because losing contact with the animal could reset the whole problem. And suddenly, the 5-day hunt gives us a different way to look at medieval trapping. A chase asks 25 dogs to keep finding one bear. A trap tries to reverse the equation. Now one bear has to find one opening. The Navaluenga case also gives us a useful warning about what not to combine. Those royal hunters were not the villagers in our reconstruction, and their 5-day pursuit was not the Dardier episode. They belong to different pieces of evidence. But put side by side, they reveal the same physical problem from opposite directions. One system spends men, dogs, time, and movement to stay attached to a bear. The other tries to make the bear return to a place already prepared for it. One keeps extending the chase. The other tries to collapse the chase into a single point, and that difference changes what tracking means. In a pursuit, tracks tell you where to go next. In an ambush, tracks tell you where not to go at all. They tell you where to wait. That is a small shift in language, but a huge shift in labor. A person following a bear must react to every new turn. A person preparing a route tries to make the bear repeat an old turn. So the same paw print can belong to 2 completely different strategies. One keeps humans moving, the other is valuable precisely because humans can stop moving. This is where a footprint stops being just evidence of the past. A track can become evidence of the future. A worn gap in a hedge is no longer just damage. A repeated route from woodland to feeding ground is no longer just where the bear has been. If the animal keeps using it, that route becomes a prediction. Phoebus pays close attention to exactly this kind of movement. He says bears could travel significant distances to feed. He says they did not simply remain beside the feeding place. And when moving without pressure, especially when returning from feeding, they often used established paths. But when hunters pushed them, they could abandon easy routes for thicker cover. That distinction is everything. A fleeing bear is reacting to you. A returning bear is following itself. And an animal following its own routine is easier to plan around than an animal reacting to yours. This is the moment the thumbnail changes meaning. It's back? Sounds like bad news. It is bad news. But the fact that it is back may also be the first useful thing the bear has done, because return creates repetition. Repetition creates pattern, and pattern gives people something strength alone cannot give them: prediction. The medieval hunting world had many possible answers once an animal could be located. Phoebus mentions dogs, bows, spears, ropes, pits, and other devices for taking bears. There was no single universal medieval bear trap, and different people had different rights, resources, and terrain. But one device is unusually valuable for understanding the logic because its instructions begin with the behavior itself. It was called a Dardier. The chapter describing it is specifically about taking bears and other animals. And the setup starts with a condition that now sounds familiar. You know an animal has been returning at night to feed in a place such as a grain field, orchard, or vineyard. Notice what has disappeared from the problem. You no longer need to search an entire forest. The bear has already chosen the destination. Now the people change the landscape around that choice. The feeding area is closed off so that one habitual entrance matters more than the others. Instead of trying to control every direction an animal could move, they reduce the number of useful directions until one gap becomes important. And that is the real midpoint of this story. At the beginning, the bear seems powerful because it can go almost anywhere. Now the people do not have to control the bear. They do not even have to control the whole field. They have to control one passage. That is the trick. Not more strength, less space. The Dardier itself was not a cage. It was a dangerous hunting device. At a high level, it used a strongly tensioned wooden pole, a pointed iron head, and a small trigger line placed across the chosen opening. The animal's movement released energy that had already been stored in the mechanism. That changes who has to be strong at the critical moment. The villager does not have to stand in front of the bear and somehow overpower it with his own body. The mechanism is already holding the force. The bear supplies the final movement. In other words, the trap does not chase the bear. It waits for the bear to complete the trap. Phoebus even compares the triggering principle to a rat trap. A rat trap. For a bear. That comparison is funny until you realize how precise the logic is. The size of the animal changes the engineering, but not the basic idea. The machine only works because the target passes through the right place and touches the right trigger. If the bear enters somewhere else, there is no clever medieval technology. There is just an empty mechanism and a very large animal walking around it. So the most important work happens before the trigger moves. Someone has to notice where the feeding is happening. Someone has to identify the repeated entrance. Someone has to close or control the other approaches, and someone has to make all of those changes without making the animal abandon the route entirely. This is not really a story about one impressive trap. It is a story about turning behavior into geography. A path becomes evidence. A gap becomes a decision. A return becomes a schedule. And then the man who explains this method does something unexpected. He basically insults it. After describing the Dardier, Phoebus dismisses this kind of hunting as low or ignoble and moves on. That raises a much more interesting question. Why would a method capable of dealing with a bear be considered bad hunting? Because medieval hunting was not only about results, it was also about status. Elite hunting culture celebrated pursuit, skill with weapons, trained hounds, horses, specialists, and visible confrontation. A royal hunt could spend days following one bear because the hunt itself carried prestige. Indirect methods did not look the same. Broader medieval evidence also associates peasants with traps, snares, nets, pits, and enclosures. That does not prove that one ordinary villager owned the exact Dardier Phoebus describes. Hunting rights varied, and a technical manual does not tell us how common a device was in every village, but the contrast still matters. The method that looked less honorable to an elite hunter could be the method that made more practical sense to people who could not field a royal hunting party. And prestige itself becomes evidence of the divide. A method could be effective and still be considered inferior because effectiveness was not the only thing elite hunting was measuring. It was also measuring courage, display, access to animals, dogs, land, and the ability to turn danger into performance. The aristocrat could afford to keep moving. The trap was designed so the bear had to move instead. That is a completely different relationship with the animal. A royal hunt turns the forest into a search. A trap turns one opening into a question. Will the bear come back through here? And if the answer is yes, the dangerous part has already been shifted away from the human body. There is one final correction to make because the word trapped can mislead modern viewers. You may picture a cage door slamming shut and a live bear pacing safely behind wooden bars. That is not what this particular device was built to do. The Dardier was designed to strike the animal. Phoebus also mentions pits, ropes, and other ways of taking bears, but we cannot combine every method into one clean imaginary capture. Medieval hunting language can describe very different outcomes, so the strongest version of this story is not a village invented one perfect bear cage. It is stranger and more useful than that. Medieval sources preserve a sequence of decisions that reduce the problem one step at a time. First, the bear is too strong to confront casually, so you drive it off or follow it. Then following it becomes expensive, exhausting, and uncertain. So you stop thinking only about where the bear is. You start thinking about where it goes. Then you find the route, but a route is still too open, so you narrow the space. Then one entrance becomes predictable, but the animal is still a bear. So you move the dangerous force from the person into the mechanism. Every answer creates the next problem, and every problem gets smaller. That is why the crude image version of medieval trapping misses the most interesting part. The useful knowledge is not just a sharpened point, a hole in the ground, or a rope. It is timing. It is terrain. It is patience. It is noticing that the same animal keeps making the same choice. The bear never stops being stronger than the people. The people simply stop competing on strength. And that brings us back to the farmyard. The bucket stops. The sheep bunch behind the fence. The bear is standing where nobody wants it. At first, the terrifying part is that it came back. Then that same fact changes meaning. If it comes back, someone can notice. If it keeps using the same route, someone can predict. If the route passes through one opening, someone can control that opening. And once that happens, the forest is no longer the problem. They do not have to control the bear. They do not have to control the forest. They have to control one path.